Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to our vegetable garden. Well, here we are in the first week of July, so it's time for my next vegetable garden tour. And isn't it fun to see how much everything has been growing? I just think that is cool. So I'm going to share some tips with you and mainly give you updates on how each type of crop is doing. And I'm going to try to do it very quickly. Now, if you are new to my videos, I wanted to explain that my husband Bill and I live in Spokane, Washington. We're on 5 acres in a rural area of Spokane County. We are in hardiness zone 5B. Okay, let's get going. I've got my hat on, got my sunscreen. We're all set to go. Okay, we're going to go row by row, and in this first bed, I am growing red Russian kale. I can see it needs to be picked again. I'm also seeing a couple of holes in some of the leaves that look very much like slug holes rather than cabbage worms. I've got this bed covered with floating row cover, and that is to keep the cabbage butterfly away from the plants so she can't lay the eggs. So it's likely slugs. This next bed is one of 2 that has a hinged raised bed cover. And this is where I'm growing Swiss chard and beets. And this bed should look a lot better than the last time you saw it when I was talking about harvesting certain crops, because I did some serious weeding and thinning in here. Okay, now you can see here's the row of Swiss chard, and then there's 2 rows of beets. This is a rainbow blend, and the beets are Cylindra and Golden. I like to use the cut and come again method to harvest the leaves on both kinds of plants because they are absolutely delicious. The plants are growing well, and the reason I'm using that cover over the bed is because Swiss chard and beets are both in the beet family along with spinach. They are very susceptible to leaf miners. The adult is a fly that lays eggs on the leaves. The eggs hatch into little maggots, and they tunnel through the leaves, just ruining them before you know it. So that's why I've got the cover, and it works very well against leaf miners. This is one of 2 beds that I have devoted to flowers to attract more pollinators to the garden. And finally, everything is blooming, or just about. So this is Apricota Cosmos, gorgeous color. I've also got some zinnias right next to it, which are Queenie Lime Orange. These beautiful snapdragons are called Double Shot Orange. And then this is an ornamental carrot that I'm just growing partly for pollinators and for cut flowers. In the back here, I've got a bunch of Nigella or Love in a Mist. These are going to be blue flowers. The variety is Miss Jekyll. And that is going to be such a pretty contrast with all of these orangey looking things. There's a whole lot going on with this bed of corn. Now you'll recall that this bed used to have peas growing in it. Well, the peas are finished, and we had pre-started some corn so it would be ready to go in and really get started growing right after we remove the peas. So you'll notice I've got pinwheels, I've got fake or toy snakes, and I've got Wile E. Coyote here, the coyote decoy. This is all not very attractive, but it is for the purpose of keeping the California quail away from these fairly new seedlings. So I can remove all of this probably in a week, but I just wanted to get these plants off to a good start and not have them be harassed and pecked at by the birds. This is a bed that Bill is growing cabbage in, and it's something where we have learned an important lesson. So I have agricultural insect netting on the bed. The hoops aren't very tall, and of course cabbage plants do tend to grow quite a bit. And boy, has Bill been having a lot of problems with cabbage worms. So I mentioned this in another video. What we have discovered is that even though this agricultural insect netting is very fine and the cabbage butterflies can't get through, if a plant is on the inside of the netting, so let me demonstrate this, and if the cabbage worm lays an egg right above it, it's possible for the egg to hatch and the tiny caterpillar to get through to the leaf and then feed and grow and cause all kinds of problems. So this has been a painful lesson. We really needed a larger piece or a wider piece of the agriculture insect netting. We should have taller hoops, and I believe that would prevent the problem. So here are examples of what cabbage worm damage looks like. And probably somewhere in here we'll find the culprit. That is just really frustrating. Now with a little luck, there won't be anything within the heads of cabbage. It's primarily the outer leaves that they seem to bother, but boy is this frustrating. Now just as a comparison, here is the bed where I'm growing broccoli. And it has minimal, possibly no damage from cabbage worms. And I believe that's for two reasons. One is I'm using taller hoops, and the other is that this piece of insect netting is much wider than the one that Bill was using for the cabbage. So let me show you how the plants are looking so far. I've got 12 plants and I've harvested 11 primary heads of broccoli. And I'm just waiting for the secondary heads to show up so I can start harvesting them. So not to brag or anything, but look at those pristine leaves. Not that we're going to harvest the leaves to eat. I do want to show you one thing though. Do you see the ends of these leaves? That might look like insect damage, but actually it's caused by the leaves kind of rubbing against the netting on breezy days. So there are no insects on there at all. It's just the contact with the netting. So if you're using the netting and you see that, don't worry about it. This is our other bed that has the hinged cover. And you'll also notice there's some shade cloth on the top. This is the bed where I have been growing lettuce. And of course, as the weather warms up, lettuce does not tolerate the heat. Just open it up here. And I wanted to tell you about this variety of lettuce. This is called Bauer, and this is the first year I've ever grown it. It's an All-America Selections winner. And take a look at the photo of me holding one head of this lettuce. Isn't that huge? And they're very dense. They have a great flavor. And I've got, I think, about maybe 7 more, and I need to start harvesting them more quickly because the temperatures are heating up. Bill also planted some onion starts in here, so those are growing as well. You're probably wondering what's going on with our hoop house. A few days ago, Bill and I put up some floating row cover on the southern half of the building so that it would decrease a bit of the intensity of the sun since it's getting pretty hot these days. We did this last year to shelter his pepper crop a bit, and it worked really well, so we decided to try it again. Let's take a peek inside. Now before we go in, I wanted to point out that both doors of the hoop house are open, and that way there is some good airflow, and also the pollinators can come in and take care of the different flowers within the hoop house. In this bed, I'm growing Alibaba watermelon. I got the seeds from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, and I am so excited about growing them because Spokane is not known for having great weather conditions on a long growing season to produce full-size watermelons. So I found this variety, and it said that you can expect 8 to 20 pound watermelons in 80 days. And that, I think, will work for our growing season. And I've got watermelons in here. So right here, you can see a little green one. There's also a couple scattered here and there on the bed. And then on this little block of wood, you might also be able to see, here's another one. I am so excited about this and hoping that I have great success. In the other hoop house bed, I'm growing Supremo paste tomatoes. They are determinates, which means that they aren't going to grow real tall, and they tend to produce their crop pretty much all at the same time. And that is ideal for canning projects. I heard great things from a friend about Supremo, and so I decided to try them out. I've got 5 plants in here. They're all doing great, and they are just covered with tomatoes. If you watched the video a few weeks back where I planted the carrots and the parsnips, you're probably amazed to see how well they're growing. They've been properly spaced or thinned, and I've got about 20 parsnip plants, so that's perfect. And they are just doing great. There's really nothing to do except to provide them with regular watering. This is our squash arbor, and it's made with 2 cattle panels or livestock panels that go up and over a pathway between the 2 raised beds. And my goal, of course, is to get these plants all the way up to the top. I haven't achieved that in past years, so this is the year, right? So in it, I'm growing small pumpkins called New England pie. I've also got different types of winter squash, cushaw, potimarron, and autumn frost. They are doing really well, and I have a tomato plant here as well, and I wanted to show that to you. Now, before I leave the squash arbor area, I wanted to point out a couple of things. This is what a male squash blossom looks like. You'll notice it's just basically a flower stuck onto the end of a very straight stem. And here's what a female squash blossom looks like. You'll see it's got this wonderful flower, and at the base there's a bulbous area that is a baby squash, or in this case a baby pumpkin. If this does not get pollinated, the little pumpkin is going to turn yellow, shrivel up, and fall off, which is always so sad. And here's one that did get pollinated. So we've got a little baby pumpkin. My all-time favorite slicing tomato is Chef's Choice Orange. They are absolutely delicious, so flavorful, and I cannot wait until I get to make my first tomato sandwich of the summer. I didn't have any room for it elsewhere, so I decided it could have part of the arbor, and it is just covered with all sorts of tomatoes of different sizes. And yeah, like I said, I cannot wait to eat my first tomato sandwich. Here is the garlic patch, and as you can see, the lower leaves are dying. Bill is intending to dig them up and harvest those wonderful bulbs in about a week. The next bed is the other one that I dedicated to flowers, and so I've got sunflowers, marigolds, zinnias, and snapdragons. At the end of the second and third rows of raised beds, we've got 10 grow bags that we're growing potatoes in. The 2 varieties are Yukon Gem and Elba. The plants are just doing great. We're finally into the 3rd row of raised beds, and in these first 2 beds I am growing paste tomatoes. Those are the types that you use that are great for making sauces and salsas, ketchup, and so on. They've got those elongated fruits. And I'm growing Gilberti and Federle. They have been blooming a lot. There's some teeny tiny tomatoes on them so far. And other than watering them, primarily what I'm doing is occasionally tying them into this upright support, because we do get windstorms every now and then, and I want to make sure nothing's going to get battered in the winds. So I just sort of bring them back in towards the support, and that's it. Here is our famous pole bean arbor. It is made up of a series of 4 individual trellises that are spaced a few inches apart. They go up and over a pathway, so that means in the heat of the summer I get to stand in the shade to harvest the beans. Now, just for something different this year, I devoted this first trellis to cucumbers, and specifically a variety that is new to me called Mini-Me. I'm very excited to see how they are, and I've been tying them up to the trellis every now and then. Plants are doing real well. The pole bean variety that I'm growing is called Vortex. I grew it last year for the first time. I like it because in addition to being flavorful and tender, it is very heat tolerant, and our summertime temperatures have really been ramping up over the last few years. I do have teeny tiny little beans. I'll give you a close-up of that, but I'm hoping for a great harvest. Last year we got a massive harvest, and that's why I figured it would be okay to dedicate one of these trellises to the cucumber crop. And here's a close-up of one of the beans. They will be much larger by the time I harvest them. On the north side of the bean arbor, I'm growing some celery. I've found over the years that it seems to benefit from a little bit of a partial shade situation. So those are growing quite well. On the south side of the bean arbor, Bill has planted some onions, and I also have some basil plants behind them. And whenever you see that they're getting a little flower head at the top, just go ahead and pinch that off. That will help them continue to grow and to develop additional side shoots. That smells good. In this last bed in the third row, I'm growing 2 Cocoselle zucchini plants, and we have been picking all sorts of zucchini already, which is very cool. And then these plants next to it, there's 3 Burpee's butterbush butternut squash, and these are going to be much smaller than the vining plants, and they will mature in 75 to 80 days, which is a lot better than regular butternut squash, so I'm very excited about them. Here's one of the Cocoselle zucchinis. We really are sold on this variety. This is the 3rd year that we've grown it. This is Bill's tomato bed, and boy, are they going nuts. So he's growing a grape tomato called Solano and a small pear tomato called Sunset Torch. I'm going to give you a close-up of one of those because, wow, it's amazing. Take a look at that. So that is Sunset Torch. Wow. Bill has planted these 2 pots, and he's growing 2 crops in each pot. The variety of tomatoes in each of them is chocolate pear. And then he also planted sweet potato slips in the pots. He did this last year and both produced really well. So I'm very impressed. This raised bed is 4 feet wide by 16 feet long, and it has a lot going on in it. I've planted a couple of zinnias to attract pollinators. There are quite a few different varieties of peppers that Bill has started from seed. Those are doing really great. Here's one example. This is a sweet mini bell called Chili Pie, and look at all of the peppers on there. Wow. Just past the peppers are a few more winter squash that I planted, and past them I've got sunflowers and marigolds. Here's a bed of sweetness bicolor corn, and it is doing really well so far. Here are our 2 beds of onions. Some have been started from seed, others from sets, which are those small bulbs that you can find at garden centers, and others were from plant starts. Every time we need to use an onion these days, we harvest every other one in the bed so that we leave extra spacing for the remaining onions to grow nice large bulbs. And just in case you thought we didn't have enough tomatoes and peppers, this is another of Bill's beds. This is where he's growing both sweet and hot peppers and more grape tomatoes. And last but not least, I thought you'd enjoy seeing how my greenstock vertical planter is coming along. It is a 5-tier planter that has an automatic watering system, so that is really helping the plants do well. And in it, I'm growing bicolor zinnias that will attract pollinators. In the next tier down, I have both basil and red vein sorrel. In the next row down, I've got jalapeno peppers. Then I've got tomatoes. One is a micro tomato called Orange Hat. This one is a patio type of cherry tomato called Patio Yellow Cherry. And then in the bottom I have Epic Hybrid eggplants, and they are doing great. Let me show you those. Take a look at this. And there's another one right over next to it. But they are doing beautifully. I've never grown this variety before, but I'm pretty impressed so far. And you can see that the yellow cherry tomatoes are doing great. This one may be ready in about a week. Okay, that's the end of the vegetable garden tour. I hope your gardens are doing spectacularly. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. I'll see you next week. Happy gardening!